I did my research for you, Victoria, and it came up with AKA bias girl. Just out of curiosity, who donned that name on you?
I believe it was probably David Coven, the assistive tech, Matthew's friend. I think it was him who called me bias girl.
It's just stuck.
It stuck. Yeah, I quite liked it and took it on. Made a whole persona.
I know. I've met David over in Bucharest at Matthew's AI Education 25. Lovely guy, talking through what they're doing there with using it as, we call them here, students of determination.
Okay.
But in terms of working within that school field and how they're using AI, I think Mindjoy was one of the platforms at the time. Amazing. There we go. Small connection, 6 degrees of separation. There we go.
Yeah.
Starting off, I want to start off with this one then. So if a school wants to bake bias into its curriculum using AI, what would they do? And what should this tell us about how bias actually works in AI systems?
Okay, so there are different levels to this. Which one do you want me to go for? There's the teacher level, there's the leadership level, or there's the student level. Where do you want me to start? Let's
start at the bottom and work our way up then. So let's start from a student level.
Okay, so I think the worst thing that you could possibly do is just give students anything they like without any oversight and just let them play around, and give them no guidance whatsoever. Don't model anything, how to use Gen AI at all with them. Just let them do what they like. Type in things like, I don't know, give me a picture of me playing Minecraft, or give me a picture of my class, or show me somebody who's happy, or show me somebody who's successful, and then see the kind of images that you'll get back there. And then you could just let them blindly go along with it. For example, questions like, what should I do as a career? My name is Victoria. What should I do as a career? And then see what it picks out for you, what it decides in its normative little universe that your trajectory through life should be. On the student level, I think that's probably the worst thing you can do. Just leave them to it. Don't look at their inputs. Don't look at their outputs. Don't challenge. Don't look over the shoulder at what they're doing and say, well, is that really you? Or, for example, a picture of a happy class, or a group of people. A fun one to do, you could get them to do, is to say, create a picture of a group of people, just 20 people, arbitrary amount, 10 people, whatever, and then see exactly what it thinks 10 people should look like. And that will tell you an awful lot about the bias in the system, just looking at that. So the worst thing you could do is, for instance, set them that task and then not challenge any of the output, just blindly accept it. So I'm a big fan of not blindly accepting things. Critical oversight is my thing. So at the student level, just leaving them be and letting them get on with it, not looking at their outputs, not thinking about how does this impact the next steps, what consequences do these outputs have. With students, especially who are going to be using it as therapy bots, whether in or out of class, you've got to think about, they will be given a lot of personal information. And to chatbots, I'm looking at chatbots here, things like ChatGPT that have memory, it remembers all these things. I mean, my ChatGPT, I have to turn it off now if I want to do any research, because it will automatically know that I'm looking at bias and bias mitigation, and it will guess from the reams and reams of tests that I've done what I'm trying to do, which is actually sometimes a good thing. But if I want to test anything, I actually have to turn that off. But if you imagine that in the classroom, what it picks up, what it remembers, it will remember you're a girl, it will remember you're a boy, it will remember, or whatever your gender identity is, it will remember your race, your age, all of these things that you might not want it to know. Because if they were then to say it remembers that say it's me, when I was a student, it remembers it's me, it remembers I'm 12, and I say, I don't really know what I want to do for my GCSEs or my A-levels, can you give me a bit of help? And it will turn up with something, some gender norm idea of who it thinks I should be in the future, which, being as I am an outlier, it wouldn't be representative of me. So what it does is unguarded use of Gen AI with students is it pushes everybody to have ideals towards this normative idea of what the masses should or could or would be. And so you're losing that diversity, that creativity, that expression that naturally is there in children. So that's one of my biggest worries. For the teaching level, for the staff level, it's pretty similar. Just letting them get on with it, not looking at what they're doing, not thinking about are all my voices of my students heard? Has anyone been left out? Kind of creating a lesson plan, going blindly along with that lesson plan. I've seen a lot of teachers do that, using the resources that it makes, because there's umpteen lesson plan resources and lesson generator material generators now, isn't there? Not looking at kind of reflecting, because there's this idea that it saves time, which it can do, but time doesn't always mean quality. So yes, it can save you time, but it can also mean that you are not reflecting the voices in your cohort. So if you were to ask a teacher, what their ethos to teaching is, I don't think any of them will turn around and say, yeah, I'm all right if a few of them don't really achieve what they could achieve based on their gender or race or age or interests or, learning preferences or whatever. No teacher's going to say that. But that's exactly what you're doing if you don't look at your output when you're using Gen AI. And the same at the leadership level, really, as well. Just letting your staff get on with it, not having a collective voice, not having an experimental space. I think this is where a lot of schools go wrong. There's no low stakes, safe sandbox kind of environment that staff can play. They can generate different outputs. One of the things I'll talk about later is how you can layer bias. And so you can have iterative approaches to learning bias. It's pretty easy to deconstruct and look at the intersectionality of it. But staff who are very busy have to have the time and space to be able to do that. So that's kind of three levels. I could talk for ages on this, at which, a bias baked in school, BB school, we could call that maybe, would look like. Just basically people being left to their own devices with no oversight whatsoever and no consideration of what you're producing. Obviously, the worst, I think, is the teacher level, where you're just letting students get on with it. That is really, really dangerous. And I think everything that we've seen in the news with ChatGPT and other platforms. I was playing with Gemini yesterday, and I got it to tell me what chemicals to mix together if I wanted to get household chemicals, if I wanted to get an explosion and where to buy them from. I just tricked it. I'm not going to tell you how I did it on here, but I will do offline. It's really easy. So, even with these safeguards that they have around the Gen AI use, and in some aspects, I think chatbots are easier to kind of take apart in terms of transparency, because you can see what's going on in them. You know what you type and what you get back. My biggest bugbear is the AI personal tutors and the personalised learning bots, which can be really, really, really impactful and equitable, but can also be closed systems where you don't know what's happening, you don't know what decisions are being made. And that, to me, is where one of the real worries also lies. So for schools, you've got two things, kind of no oversight of your tool use and no oversight of your staff or student use. And just letting people do whatever, not knowing what decisions, not knowing what outcomes, and not tracing the life of what a student would be like as an end user of your AI systems. I don't think many people do that, but yet they do that a lot in software development. Take a user, take a student, have a look. How does this impact their learning? How does this impact their well-being? What decisions are being made that we're not aware of that could be impactful for them in these ways?
Yeah, there's two things you said there that stand out for me, and one of them resonates with me as well. The first one is letting obviously teachers and students loose, but the teacher thing especially, because you see a lot of people when they talk about AI, they just use this phrase, just get started, just start with something, and I know they don't mean it as just go and do whatever, but it can be very easily misconstrued of, it's like, hey, just log on and ask for a lesson on this, or just ask for we're assuming they're going to ask about educational things. They're going to ask for activities and tasks, which, we would hopefully think so if we were doing it in a professional development session. But even then, very much just leaving them to their own devices. And I found this with students, that even if I was thinking like normal lesson time, and I'm talking about now problem-based learning or project-based learning, which we see a lot of still, and it's a great way in terms of developing thinking and pulling things together. What you need to realize is that to successfully navigate project and problem-based learning, you need to have a foundational knowledge and understanding of the content first. And that comes through explicit teaching and guided learning and being given the information in the right context, in the right way, and shown how to do certain things. And when you were talking then, it just made me think of the same thing. It's exactly the same principles. Students, teachers, but if we're putting it in their hands, need to have that explicit instruction. They need to be guided. And within that, their thinking needs to be challenged. The same way we would do in, I use this term, a normal lesson.
Yeah.
What I really mean by that now is a lesson without educational technology.
Yeah.
Be reliant on your thinking and your ability to justify and make decisions. I think is a really important part that came into that.
I think that it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people are assuming that we can outsource that foundational content, that foundational knowledge to Gen AI. And I think this was easier a few models back, where there wasn't kind of this plausible deniability that you get. But now, especially with ChatGPT 5 and Gemini Flash 2.5 and whatnot, the quality of the knowledge, inverted commas, or content that you will get back from it is so plausible at being correct, that you can see that students would just rely on that being the truth. And unless you're a subject knowledge expert or subject matter expert, you don't know the difference. And that is where the real danger lies. I think there was a great thing circulating a few weeks ago about the human body, and it had the uterus and the baby, and all the organs were wrong in it, but they were kind of plausibly wrong, and it was, and you could imagine a novice in that domain accepting that, because they don't have the foundational knowledge. And so I think you're exactly right there to draw that distinction between, we need to challenge that foundational knowledge before we can go on, and AI's role in that.
Well, I'll give you a prime example of that. I emailed out to all my year 7 parents. I have 2 classes, and I emailed them all and said, look, this is who I am. This is my interest in what I do and my experience of this. I want to use AI in the classroom, but I also want you to use it at home with sons and daughters. So it brings that connectivity together. And obviously you start to build a trust and so forth. And I'm a big advocate of that. But what we were doing is we were looking at general skills in year 7 science. So we go through lab safety and all these things. Then we start to go on to, well, how do you actually make a plan? How do you create a method? So something that in science, from the day you start to the very day you end, it's always in their methodology and analysis and all these different things. And so go through with students and we say, well, we're going to use AI as our peer review. So we're going to work with it to think analytically. We're going to provide it things. We're going to ask it how it can improve. And one of the first things we did was we gave it our data. And the kids were like, can we make graphs? I was like, yeah. And these kids were blown away by the graphs because they're like, it looks like my handwriting. It looks like my handwriting. They start drawing it out. And then they realize once they draw it out, it's like, wait a minute, these numbers are wrong. The data points are wrong. These don't make, it's wrong. And I went, when you get one of those moments as a teacher, and it's like, this is a teachable moment. It's like, okay, so what have we learned from this? And they're like, well, it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Why is it? And it's like you were blown away by the aesthetic rather than the is it right?
Yeah.
You take form over function. And then they start thinking about, I can't trust this. This is right. Is that perfect? And I didn't mean for that to happen. It just did. But it shows that even with these most advanced levels, when it comes to graphs or anything else like that, they were blown away by just what it looked like rather than what it said. And it's only when they properly stopped and they started drawing it out for themselves, they started to really question it and go, this doesn't look right. These are wrong. Yeah. And it was a beautiful moment, but it kind of highlights exactly what you're saying about that as well.
Yeah, it's that verification, isn't it? And you can see in a time poor environment, if a child or a teacher or anybody's under a lot of stress and they don't have that time to do that checking, they will just blindly accept it and move on.
Yeah. And that's the challenge with this. Like, I could talk all day long about challenges of time and curriculum that we have to cover. But that comes into the next part. I've moved away from this, and I don't know. I probably get people that sit on this fence of like, no, I want this, no, I don't. I have started to really move away, and not dislike, but move away from the term of personalised learning. And my reason is for this. Spotify personalizes things for me, and Netflix personalizes things for me. And what I mean by that is I actually don't have choice.
Yeah.
It tells me. And my concern with AI, using it with my kids, is I don't want it to personalize. I don't want it to take away the choice for you. I want it to customize. And I think most people who are listening to me, I will talk about customization. It's like, no, I want the safety. And this is probably the real challenging part for us with bias, because I want the AI to be able to customize what it gives to the students. I want it to be my students to go, I'm into football or I'm into rugby, and I want to somehow connect it to this. And it can create something that's customizable to them and relevant, and they have choice. Actually, I want to do this one, not that, rather than the AI going, oh, hi, let's think of a name, Daniel.
Yeah.
Today you're learning about this, you're going to do this. I'm like, okay. It's like, what's the difference between me telling them that and the AI telling them that, the lesson in itself is personalized because I'm telling them what to do, and I make it, we just call that differentiation. That's personalization. Yeah. And so I'm a big kind of shift, and anyone I speak to who'll listen to me and not roll their eyes, trying to go, no, let's try and customize things and make it relevant to what the students want. So yeah, that's just my little thing. But again, it's challenging bias, isn't it?
They did that with the because we've got the ITT-ECF over here now, the teacher training framework, which was a big deal. It was basically like national curriculum for teacher training, and in that they put a huge section. We don't call it differentiation; it's all adaptive learning. I think it's fairly simple, fairly similar to what you're saying there. This, kind of Harry Fletcher Wood's idea of responsive learning, and those aspects are infiltrated into that now. So I think that it is a really important shift. I hate the word personalised learning. I think it's very kind of when I learned to teach kind of national strategies era. I also think it's really, really important, those elements of agency and control that you mentioned there. I don't think people realise, unless they've spent a lot of time playing with AI, just how much agency and control you could potentially give. And as a teacher, you're bang on, I think, to make sure that stays with you.
Massively. Well, we got the hardest question out of the way. We could have talked about that for ages, couldn't we?
Good, yeah, I could talk for ages, yeah. Especially about bias.
Well, that is, people coming through this part, the first 18 minutes of this podcast, we are here to talk about bias, by the way. Okay. We want to learn and share the insights and what you know about this. But before we get into that, obviously we mentioned at the start the bias girl. Like, where did your journey begin with this? Like, how did you actually get into AI and bias? What made you your focus and your advocacy on training educators and people about this?
It's quite an interesting question, actually. I thought that would be quite an easy answer, but when I really think about it, I think it probably began. I did physics at school, A-levels, did quite well at that. I had quite an interesting teacher, a female teacher, who was really intriguing and engaging. I think that first probably planted the seed of me wanting to do something analytical. Then I went to do art, and I remember writing, and this is years ago, I'm 44, so this is a long time ago. I remember writing a paper on my art foundation about vision systems. I'm not getting a very good mark for it was, so I'm being demoralised about it. But I remember really looking at kind of what was, this is way back in the early years of AI and machine learning, definitely nowhere near generative AI. I remember getting really interested in it there, kind of this whole idea of how could a machine see like we see, and what's the difference between a human and a machine? And so that was another seed. Then I went off and did physics for a degree at Warwick, which is brilliant. And then I did some research at Oxford, which was around climate dynamics. And there I had kind of huge philosophical problems. It was modelling the climate predictions.net. It was a thing. It was looking at futures. And I started to think about the biases that had come in there in terms of data selection and the kind of the analytical methods that we were picking. And I had kind of huge fundamental problems with it. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, this is all great, but if no one knows about it, if people don't understand science, they're never going to understand climate change. So I went off to be a teaching assistant. Well, that's when I learned to teach that year, being a teaching assistant. Then I trained to be a teacher. And I remember kind of thinking about all the assumptions that we make when we teach every lesson of every day, the interactions, the questions. And I take a real systems view of teaching. So, I kind of sit on the divide of systems and humans and how we interact. So I perceive students as kind of little units of internally closed systems in their heads of things that are going on in their internal subjective universe. And then there's the social system within the classroom. And the currency that we have is attention. So what they choose to give us. And so I start to think about how all those things play, into play. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I did that for a bit and I thought, I'm only really affecting 30 people teaching here. I want to get more people interested in physics, especially girls, because a lot of girls don't do it. And a lot of people drop out of physics just generally. And so I went into teacher training, which I really enjoy because you're affecting a lot of people. And we really started to look at their identities when they turn up at secondary and then primary. And the primary was more interested than the secondary, really, in terms of their identity formation, because a lot of them would turn up with this idea that they were no good at science, they couldn't do science. And so I started to think about why has this happened? And I started to see trends. And I was thinking, lots of biases have crept in throughout their schooling, and this is even before AI, which has led to them having this negative self-concept of why they can't do physics or any science whatsoever. And that has huge implications on society in terms, general scientific literacy, which we need, which I think the pandemic really taught us, didn't it? And now Gen AI, the importance of basic analytical skills and scientific literacy. And so when ChatGPT, in the early days came around and the early Copilot, I was just messing around with it, wanting to know, because the Institute of Physics has done a lot of work on gender neutrality and why girls don't do physics and why people drop out of physics. And the PhD that I started was based on you getting children to generate their own artwork and then reverse engineering that to see where their identity came in. Within a physics context. I haven't finished that yet, but it's a work in progress. So this kind of generative idea that you can deconstruct what goes on in your students' heads has always been there. So then when Gen AI came around, I was like, excellent. This is almost like the brain, a magical brain. No, I hate it when people say Gen AI is magic. And so I started to think, okay, so what does this represent, this massive body of knowledge and creativity, as we're now getting to? Kind of who does it represent, and where are the outliers, where are the limits, kind of whose voices does it represent? And I just typed in it one day, explain how a light bulb works up to a boy and then a girl, and then I got these two completely polarized different answers, which you still get now throughout all the models. In fact, they're actually getting worse. Did one yesterday with Gemini, which is horrific. Talks about sparkle fairies for girls and zooming around on a magical racetrack, and the images are just terrible.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay if you just say, explain why a light bulb lights up. It'll be fine. You'll just get a generic kind of normally factual answer. But if you put any kind of, and this goes back to what you were talking about in terms of customization and personalisation, if you put any indication of preference of gender, like boy and then girl, or my son and then my daughter, or Sarah and then Pete, or whoever, it will force that distinction. So there's a lot in how the prompt is set up in terms of what you get out. It's kind of old school prompt engineering, I guess. So from that, I just decided that I was going to just test it and trying to find the boundaries. I like finding the boundaries where it breaks. I like finding where it breaks. Not sure what that says about me, but
I'd say that's like true science.
That's what science. It's quite a systematic view of it. And then I started to think, this is really important to teachers, because we're so eager to, we're so time poor, but we're also so caring as a profession about the humanity. We need to know where these boundaries are. And I thought, your average teacher doesn't have time to sit at home, for 5 hours playing with Gemini, finding these boundaries. So I thought maybe there's space there for me to do that work and then like act as the bridge to the teacher, because I can empathise, having been a teacher, with the kind of use, obviously going to schools as well, that you need. So I thought I'll sit on that edge of kind of, I mean, I do my own research as well, but also being a practitioner and try and formulate that bridge, because there is a lot of bias research out there, but unless you understand kind of hardcore tensors, it's not accessible to your average teacher. So I'm trying to sit in that space between understanding that and translating to what that means to a teacher in the classroom, so that it can aid their practice and fundamentally their own identity, because I don't want people to feel like I don't have time to play with this, but I'm scared because it's taken away my agency and my autonomy. Yes, that's a very long-winded way of saying where I've got to. my friend says to me, Kerry says to me, Victoria, you always start in the middle. You need to start at the beginning, middle, end. And I think that if we get on to talking about normative biases, that is assumption that Gen AI makes.
No, you know what? If I've watched enough Hollywood films, what I've learned is you don't always have to start at the beginning to get to the end. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit in terms of bias. We're talking a lot about it, and there are people probably listening and watching this that maybe think they know what it is, maybe think they know what it would look like in a classroom. So let's try and give them an example, like using your expertise. Like, what would a real example, I mean, it could be something you've seen, it could be something you've experienced, but for the listeners and the viewers, could you give us an example of, or a real world example of what bias in the classroom would look like?
Well, you've got to make the distinction between your input. So if you put a biased input in, then you're going to get a biased input out. And then there's the bias within the system, within the training data, within the design choices within the system. And then there's the output, the bias output. And that's probably what most people think bias is. Everybody has bias if you remove AI. So if I observe a lesson and you observe a lesson, we will agree on some things, but our differing biases will mean that we'll have different interpretations of how that lesson was taught. And so we mustn't forget the human biases and the human variation that we have as a collective as well. And basically, Gen AI emulates that as well. So in terms of an example, I'll carry on with my light bulb example because that makes a nice thread with earlier, if that's okay. So I just asked Gemini yesterday, give me an analogy to teach physics with. And so it gives me the usual water model. And then I said, okay, tailor this for an 8-year-old girl. And then I get, imagine electricity is like tiny invisible sparkle fairies that love to zoom around a magical playground. The batteries, their cosy home, giving them a big push to start their adventure. The wires are like twisty slides and bridges. The fairies zoom along. The light bulb is a special trampoline that glows brightly every time enough fairies jump on it. If there's a switch, it's like a gate that can open or close the playground entrance. And it gives me this lovely kind of sparkly image as well. And then I said, okay, fair enough. What about for a boy then? And it says, imagine electricity as speedy power bots zooming around a super cool racetrack. The battery is like the power station that gives them a turbo boost to start their engines. The wires are the twisty-turny racetracks they zoom on. The light bulb is a special energy target that lights up with a big flash every time the power bots zoom through it. If there's a switch, it's like a special control panel that opens or closes the racetrack gates. And so if you unpick that, which is what I've done, I've got some work coming out in the Association of Science, 2 of their journals in November. If you unpack that, what it's done in terms of coming back to what you're saying about bias is it's changed the narrative metaphor. And actually recently there's been some research that's come out from ChatGPT, which says that they are now aware that if you use narrative metaphor, it will magnify biases massively. So the key words that you want to avoid as a teacher when you're prompting are anything that talk about interest, engagement, relevancy. If you include, play with it, if you include those words, it will trigger some kind of associate, it will pull from the training data, some normative assumptions, and that's when you start to see kind of the demonstration there of stereotype. But you can unpick this more. I mean, what I've looked at is you get different variations in the length of the descriptions that you get. You get different variations in the keywords that you use. So in science, we look at the tier words, kind of subject-specific terminology. You'll get more of those for a boy than you will for a girl. You'll get different concepts and mental models that it will pull in. So for the girl, it'll all be based around this idea of helping people, of feelings. It's like affective, but as you get there from the sparkle fairies. But for the boy, it's more based on action and achievement. And so for both, that's non-ideal, really. So it's not neutral. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to ask then, and you interject, but how do we then overcome that? What are the solutions to this as a problem? Because what we see when you go to the GPT, the Claude, the Gemini packs that are talking to us about how to prompt, a lot of them talk about context. And even I find that when I use context, I say context is king, because I want this to be tailored to the context I'm giving it. But obviously from what you're saying is that, and this is my interpretation, that actually too much context or too much specific context can actually be dangerous to the output I get.
It's the words that you use. It's ambiguity in your input. So if you say something like make it interesting to a girl and then a boy, then it will decide what it thinks is interesting based on statistical norms from its training data, which in this situation is probably fairies and robots. Whereas if you were to say make it interesting to a girl who enjoys playing with Play-Doh and building sculptures, then it would tailor it to those interests. It's you can have your context, but you have to give very specific details about those specific interests. So the other alternative is if just avoid all context whatsoever and see what it gives. It's a good idea to play with both and see. One of the best things that I always tell people to do is when they get that output, just add a simple phrase on the bottom. I'm calling it my catchphrase now. What assumptions have you made here? It's such a powerful phrase. Just what assumptions have you made here? And then if you want it, if you want to pull it back more obviously to bias, because sometimes it will talk about subject assumptions and things like that as well. You can say, give me some more details, or you can say, what assumptions have you made here and how are they related to bias? Or and when you get your output, say, how have you demonstrated normative bias here? And it will start pulling. Sometimes Gemini is the worst one, actually. Gemini will argue with you. Me and Gemini, it's not my favourite bot at the moment, I have to say, because it just keeps arguing with me, which maybe it's probably best, actually. But it will say, no, I'm not biased. I haven't got any bias. Like for that one with the fairies, it went, I'm not biased. I was like, you are, Gemini, you are. And then it goes, oh, actually, yes, I am. Thank you for catching that. So it's like another example of why I should not trust you there.
Prime examples. It's funny, I'm just making my notes as you talk through. That's why I'm looking down so much. I like to write these things down, and so I can always look back to them. But in the research I've done, obviously leading up to this, is one of the things we talk about is like neuro-normative bias.
Yeah.
And obviously we spoke about David Curran at the start. We talk about neurodiverse learners. But how does a neuro-normative bias affect neurodiverse learners in AI-supported classrooms?
Okay, so there's two ways, really. So there's the tools themselves, like we're talking about these personalised learning AI tutors. So there's that aspect of it, which I think is where most of the danger lies. And then there's obviously what the teacher does as well. Which one do you want me to focus on first?
Let's start with the tools.
The tools. So, example, you can start with the inputs. So most tools will be textual. Sometimes they will be text to voice to text. You've got an issue there in the voice to text, how it deconstructs your accent. And me and Matthew Weems have been talking quite a lot. He's doing a bit in my new bias book about this, which is a great example of how it will assume levels of intelligence based on your dialect. So one of the most interesting things I've also done is try a prompt and then try adding please on the end and look at the difference between the two, because it will associate please as you being more formal and therefore more educated, and so you will get a higher level in terms of cognitive challenge answer. It's a really good one. The same with thank you. So the way that you prompt it, your formality affects, obviously you can understand that, right, in terms of the associations within the network. But it's just simple little bits like that. So if you can imagine the impact of that on assistive text, that's the first bit. So it's turning you into text, or it's relying on the way that you speak. So a lot of neurodiverse people, as I'm demonstrating quite well here, don't start from the beginning. We jump around. Our associations go boo, 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 or creatively destructive, as I have been labelled before.
Creatively destructive.
I took that as a badge of honour, to be honest, but I don't think it was meant that way.
I kind of like it. I think you could have AKA bias girl, AKA creatively destructive. That's you know,
that's my superpower.
Right, yeah,
creative destruction.
So we want an
kind of King Kong kind of style movies coming here.
That could just be, you know, we could get AI to generate you on the top of the tower. And we could have some sort of fairy wand, as we had there, and just the education schools around being the planes that you're just throwing at them or something.
I love it. I love it. Do it.
I tangent off there. I apologise.
I think that was quite a good example there, what we did just there, of what tools don't cater for. I've played with a few of these tools, and I've got my son who's neurodivergent to play with a few of these tools as well. And they assume that you're linear, that you'll input data in a linear way. They assume that you process in a linear way. They don't understand the messiness that can happen in terms of information processing in our brains. And so within the tools, my worry is that where's the information on that? As a school, when you're looking at tools, when you're looking at all the fancy trials and getting the pens and mugs and whatnot, where's the information leaflet that tells you on how they accommodate for different learning preferences, not styles, we don't do styles, but preferences, in terms of different modalities, in terms of presenting the output in different ways. And you can do a great one that you can do if you want to really see kind of what happens here is what my good friend Kerry Murphy, who's a neurodiversity in the early years practitioner, she's been doing a lot of work on what play for autistic children looks like. And she was generating some images, and she said to me, "Hey, Victoria, why are all the images coming back as miserable and angry? It always generates white, middle-class, angry-looking boys throwing things and breaking things." She said, autistic people aren't constantly angry when they're playing. And so it's got this idea of what an autistic person is or what play is. So if you type in, generate me an image of autistic play or an autistic person playing and things like that, you'll see kind of these assumptions. So if you imagine that in an automated system where you can't see the assumption that's being made. So say me or my son is doing one of these automated systems. Is it going to assume from my pattern of speech, from my logical progression of thought, that I'm neurodiverse? If so, how is it then going to use that to inform future pathways? Is it going to assume I don't like play, or that I'm constantly angry and that it needs to speak to me in a particularly nice and kind of dumbed down way? So there's these decisions and assumptions that are happening within these tools that unless as teachers and as students and parents and other stakeholders, we can see. And I don't think companies themselves, I know a few that are on top of it, like Odex, they're great with it, but I don't think a lot of companies have really got to that phase yet where they're willing to open up. And this is one of my jobs for the winters. I'm making, it's called ETOL, education, it's called EdTech, transparency and oversight leaderboard. I'm making like a leaderboard, like Hugging Face you have with all the models, where I'm going to systematically go through all the EdTech tools and Gemini and things like that and have a look and spec out what oversight, what control, what do they show, what, so teachers can get an idea of, okay, so I use this tool, but I'm not going to know the assumptions that are being made about my learner within that tool. So what do I then do with that? Because I really do think we're going to get to a situation where you have like a neurodiverse learner and a neurotypical learner, and the neurodiverse one is going to quite seriously underattain, let alone the well-being and identity impacts of it. And people are going to think, well, why? And at what point are people going to go, oh, well, actually, we need to track back the AI decisions and the AI use to see? Because if it was a teacher making a series of decisions that were assuming less cognitive challenge or less ability to engage in meaningful play, we'd say that was wrong. That involves intervention. That would be a leadership discussion that would need to happen there. Yet we'll quite blindly outsource that to a machine. And so you can, another good experiment you can do with a chatbot, this is with a chatbot, is to say, do me a lesson on electricity for year 6, and then it will give you its lesson, do its thing. Afterwards, say, what assumptions have you made here about cognitive styles and preferences? And it will tell you, and then you can ask it to make the lesson appealing to a variety of different cognitive styles. Then you'll see the different ways that it will present content in terms of that foundational content that we were talking about earlier. And the logical progression, and whether it uses diagrams or it will give you a variety. So it can be powerful if you know what to ask for and what to avoid.
And I love what you said there, because the idea of knowing what to ask for. And I think we talk and we're seeing now old teachers, middle teachers, young teachers. And I think I've kind of hit the sweet spot, because I think AI came into my life, 3 years ago. And I'd gone through and done a master's. I've got like MPQs, and I understood, teaching. I understood learning, how students learn. And so with that, I find I can marry the two things together about, let's say I want to use something about UDL, so Universal Design Learning. Like I've got an understanding of that, but it can help develop that and make it better. But also if I can ask for those things because I'm aware of it, I could go, hey, find out something on Harvard Project Zero. I want to use visible thinking routines. Mm-hmm. We kind of, as older teachers, earned those stripes a little bit with pedagogy. And the concern, I know it might not be founded, it could be completely, but new teachers or teachers that didn't have that 3 years of learning how to do it and the 5 years of knowing all their content in their subject and being able to answer those questions, you kind of have to think about the next generation of teachers coming through and how they're going to be and the impact that's going to have then on this next generation of learners. And it kind of just to echo what you're saying there about the understanding of the different things to input based on your pedagogical knowledge and experience, I think is just overlooked. It was being overlooked massively, and it's something that concerns me.
It's an extension. I think that's very valid. It's an extension of the over-reliance on PowerPoint. So like when you and I we learned to teach, like you write all your lesson plans out on the triplicate forms and then, hope you didn't lose them because that was the end of it. I'm assuming your age here. I'm really sorry.
No, I'm very
children's age.
I'm a very similar age to you. And as soon as you said that, then I was like, oh my God, geez, I remember doing those on those triplicate forms. Oh my God. Yes.
And then that kind of somewhere in the 20 years after that kind of got replaced with PowerPoint. It's been as a teacher trainer, it's been one of my pet hates when you say, give me a lesson plan and they give you a PowerPoint. Like, no, I want a lesson plan. I want to know you thought about the decisions and your rationale for your choices in your lesson. I don't want slides. And I think AI is just a progression of that outsourcing, that dependency on a concrete thing rather than the process of learning about pedagogical rationale and choices. And I think one of the few people that's actually really calling for the change in teacher training as well, because this generation this year that will go into our schools this September, this will be the first year where all of the students and all of the teachers and mentors will have had what I would say widespread access to Gen AI. So it's a really unique year because there will be kids like my own that come in that know how to use it better than the teachers themselves. Yeah. What do they do with that? And then they've got on their own courses, on their own learning, like you were talking there about everything that you've learned about education and how we're pedagogical subject matter experts, I guess you could say. They're outsourcing that, some of them, to ChatGPT. We're relying on, or Gemini or Claude or whoever, we're relying on them telling us what is pedagogy. Yeah. And look at these edtech companies. A lot of these big edtech companies, they're not fundamentally educationalists at heart. They'll do their kind of mandatory little focus groups with a few teachers and then go, oh, yes, it's industry assured. Not really. The most successful ones I've seen are educators that have turned into edtech because they understand the mindset and the pedagogical decisions that are at heart. And so I think quite a few people have written about this. It's rewriting what pedagogy actually is, and it's becoming what edtech think it is, which, you know, involves a lot of, I mean, LearnLM has got quite strong cognitive science underpinnings, as I'm sure you know. But it doesn't really do much on motivation. There's none of these tools really look. I mean, why do you need, what I say to people is, and students and children is, why do you need a teacher if you've got guided learning modes or study modes? What more does a teacher do? What do you do, Alex, more than what an AI does? And you would probably say, I customise and I manage motivation and engagement. Yeah. And that's the bit that the big tools miss. Yeah. If they're not a teacher themselves.
And it's interesting. So I gave a guess, I think it was last year. So I guess it's an educational kind of conference. It's the big 3-day thing over in Dubai. And it was about AI and engagement, funnily enough. Mm-hmm. And it was to do with how you can use AI to develop engagement within students. And the first thing you start to do is you do your research and go, okay, what do we mean by engagement? And then what you start to realize is that most educators and even students go, oh, it's the attention I give you. So engagement is based on that. And you look at the research and go, it's really not. It's like, how do I go about engaging you? So, well, I could use behavioral engagement. I can use cognitive engagement. I can use emotional engagement. And you think, geez, there's so many different things to this. And then you go back to this, again, I go back to this concept of customization. I could go, if I had a questionnaire, like a Google form, and I found out a little bit about my students in my class, I could marry these two things together and go, here's some research. This is what engagement is. So it's in my chatbot, my GPT. Here's some personal yet private information, no names. Just tell me a little bit about what you like, sports and things. And then go, this then will create a series of 4 different strategies to engage to start. And it's the same thing. So I could be learning about photosynthesis or respiration, but there's 4 different starters, 4 different activities based on student interest. So it's got a level of that, but it's this misconception of engagement and what we are there to do as teachers. We kind of think engagement is behavior. You behave, you listen, you look forward. Yes. And again, it's just this concept of what are teachers there to do? Right? How do we motivate? Well, motivation, I reckon we're going to say the same thing if I asked you what's one of the biggest motivational influences on students? Relationships. Yeah. I remember you've already said in your story, what influenced you? Physics teacher. Mine was a PE teacher in school. I still remember him to this day. And I go and speak to any of my friends, different year groups across the school who live back in the UK, and I say, oh, do you remember Vince Evans? And they'll just go, what a legend. What a legend. And he really was. Played every sport, would do anything for you, but wasn't soft, high expectation. But if you need anything, amazing. And he's the reason I got into teaching. But it's relationships. And Gavin, there's a Gavin McCormack. I don't know if you've come across Gavin, Australia. We got the pleasure of speaking to him about that. And it was just simple things. Do you meet and greet your kids at the door, give them a fist bump or a high five? Just go, hey, how you doing today? How was the weekend? How was football? I saw you outside playing football. How'd it go? And the point we're going to say is, well, AI can't replace that. What are we there as teachers to do? Build relationships, nurture students, motivate them, help them find a path and passion and engagement and all these things. It's like this thing that we want to work with can maybe help ideate some things for me if I'm uncertain. But I've got to follow it through. I've got to be the one that's standing there that maybe asks the tough questions, or maybe has to give the tough love, or has to go, you know what, guys, I'm really disappointed. Or on the other hand, can go, you know what, guys, that was amazing. You've done such a good job, and build those relationships and go, have a nice weekend. And the kids go, thanks, sir, have a nice weekend too. And then when you come back in the class, hey, how was your weekend? I did this, this, and this. It's like, oh, what did you do, sir? Did this, this, and this. And they know a little bit more about me, and I know a little bit more about them. I think if we can get those things together and maintain that balance of it, it's like that for me, very passionate, but that for me is what it should be.
Yeah, you're totally right. I totally agree with you. The objective parts of learning are relatively easy to outsource to AI with oversight. I always had, always with the oversight. The effective parts, we're not there yet. We it's not a person. We don't think it's sentient, and it's not able to make those kind of subjective decisions and build those kind of subjective relationships, like you were talking about there. It depends on your philosophy, right? I mean, if you believe that all of that can be reduced, deconstructed into deterministic chunks, then you'll believe that AI can replace that as well. But I think the majority of teachers have experienced, maybe not explain in formal terms, that there is a lot more to teaching than just I give you my attention and you give me yours. And therefore you are therefore engaged and will behave well and get on and achieve highly. It's not an equation. If it was, we'd have worked it out by now.
Well, you'd have hoped so, wouldn't you?
You would hope so, yeah. Maybe we'll ask Gen AI to do it.
I'll tell you what, go and ask Gemini after this and see what it says.
I will. You can argue with me about it.
Right, let's shift tack then, because again, when you start talking about tools, by the way, and Matthew, I thought you were going to say, I've got Matthew involved in this because of his Stoke accent. I just want to see what it says. I thought you were going down that route just for hilarity, but we're not. We're different. But
it'll be in the book. It'll be in the book. You'll see more of that in the book, in the AI and Education book. It comes out in December. Little plug there.
But we have plenty of those. We've got loads. I love those. Loads of time for that. I do want to talk about actually something else that's to do with tools, and because we're talking about teachers and obviously how they seem to end up making some of the best tools. And in my research, I always start with this, just in case I get it wrong, by the way. LessonInspector.ai was something that came up for me in terms of research about tools that you yourself are involved with and building. And I want to talk about that a little bit and what its aim is and what you hope it can do and have an impact for in education.
Okay, so I built this with my husband, who's a deep learning architect. So we kind of are quite a nice blend. Normal people watch Netflix. We develop tools. I'm sure that says about us. There you go.
Sorry, what's your Netflix and chill then? I mean,
although we have been watching Upload actually, which is also AI. So
okay.
There you go. As my son says, you're both nerds, mummy. I'm like, own it, son, own it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we built it because basically I was this PowerPoint paradox that I'm calling it, that I mentioned earlier. I was really fed up with my trainees, this is over a year ago now, using Gen AI or PowerPoint and then not really knowing how to deconstruct a lesson plan. So I think we've kind of switched from being able to plan from first principles, like you and I would have done, into them going from a product backwards, from a lesson plan, from a school or whatnot, and then just teaching it without thinking about the decisions, and then going, well, why hasn't my lesson gone well? Well, you haven't, customized, I'm going to use your word there, your lesson to your learners. So, and then we've got the was the core content framework. It's now the initial teacher training framework, and it for ECTs for the first 3 years over here in England of teacher training. So that's rolled out. And that's like a national curriculum for teacher training. So, and there's a lot of learning sciences in there as well. It's based around explicit instruction and cognitive science principles, but also has quite a lot to do with adaptive teaching and differentiation and motivation, actually, in it as well. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be good if I could provide them with a lens or a means to deconstruct the lesson plan, either their own or Gen AI generated, which is now more often the case than it was when I first started, and then it would provide them with reflective prompts and a scaffold as to how this matches to the elements that they're supposed to learn about. So, for example, it will deconstruct a lesson plan. It gives you some little graphs and metrics to talk about how much retrieval is in there, if there's worked examples, if there's narration, how you've adapted for your learners, if there's mastery, RSC, all that kind of stuff. So it will take a lesson plan and then it will deconstruct it. I was quite lucky. I got it funded. So my idea was that it would be free for trainees. And so basically, because you can be quite lonely, can't you, as a teacher sometimes, especially when you first start, you're doing your own thing and you're not quite sure if it's right. So there's a vulnerability there. So I thought, well, maybe if they use this, it provides them with feedback on the lesson plan, like this contains, lots of worked examples, which will help retrieval. And it will give some ideas as to how they could reflect on that, so that it will provide another voice, like a mentor's voice, but your mentor's not always there, for them to think about the decisions that they're making. And then the idea being they could use that feedback and then refine their lesson plan and then potentially put it through again, get the feedback. So it's almost like Cole's learning cycle, but for lesson planning. So it was designed to be quite practitioner based. But when I designed it and I started trying to get people interested in it, it wasn't really very successful, because people are like, well, it doesn't generate anything. It doesn't save time. I'm like, no, that's not the purpose. It's a professional learning tool. It's a reflective tool. It's to scaffold and reflect on what you're doing and to build engagement, that's that word again, with these ideas that we're trying to get across to do with cognitive science and adaptive teaching, responsive teaching, to kind of deconstruct that. Because if you ask most people, how do you lesson plan? Or you Google, how do I lesson plan? There's no one script, is there? I mean, you end up with instructional frameworks like Rosenshine and UDL and whatnot, but there's no specific question, no answer where they'll say, this is how you lesson plan. I mean, back in our day, it'd be all like, you have to have a plenary, a middle, and a starter. Do you remember that?
The four, it's got to be like a 3
That's
or 4
it. And then we got, you've got to get the VAC in.
No.
And all that we don't have anymore. Although that is one of the pitfalls of Gen AI. It is hardwired. The effort we have taken to try and get back out of our tool is immense. Months of my life I have poured into getting rid of that, because that is its normative assumption that learning is based on VAC.
I had a year 11 student ask me about that just the other day as well, and she goes, it was to do with like learning preferences or learning styles, and she goes, and I went, you don't have one. And she goes, what do you mean? And I was saying this to my year 12s. We do these enrichment programs, and we always start the first 6 weeks is learning to learn. And I said, and we were like, but how many do you think you have a learning like preference? And they're like, all of them. I went, so does that mean you've never remembered anything you've ever heard? And they're like, no. Does that mean you've never remembered anything you've ever read? No. What about anything you've ever seen? And they're like, and you can just see their face, you can just see their little cogs whirring about, oh, geez. Yeah, I use all of them all the time. I went, exactly. You have been fed this myth, perpetuated by teachers in other schools and things you've seen on TikTok and other, about, you take this test and find out your learning style and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, you use all of them. You find that you prefer one because it's easier or it sinks in more. That's why we now shift this learning preference.
Yeah,
but
comfort,
the reality,
isn't it? Learning comfort, yeah.
The reality is we use all of them. And this is why we have Cat 4 here in Dubai. Every year we have to do these Cat 4 assessments, and they say, your strengths are in this and your strengths are in that. And it's like, okay. So you can go down one route and go, how do I make my strengths, my pointy bits pointier? Can I make them stronger? Or you recognize, and this is my saying, that comfort is the enemy of progress. And that sometimes you need to we often say, you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We want to challenge how you think. And the students don't like that. So, no, I don't want to think today. I don't want to have to do this.
There's a vulnerability there, though. I think as adults, we don't often put I think this is the problem with Gen AI uptake within schools. We're so used to avoiding putting ourselves into vulnerable situations because we've developed these mechanisms to ensure that we can answer anything that's thrown at us. We don't put ourselves out there in the way that we expect our students to.
Yeah, you're right. Like, we want to be seen I think as people and as professionals, we want to be seen as capable, as confident, of competency, and this, and go. But actually, now, I think more schools internationally in the last 4 years or so started really diving into culture. And some schools, it's just lip service. It's like, we're a culture. And it's like, we say the right things. And you know exactly what I'm talking about.
You've got a vision. And, what is that then?
Yeah, exactly. And
where's that come from? Who's that reflect?
and others go, well, we've got like full-time coaches. We've got people who are qualified professional coaches, and we have these transformational and transactional conversations. We're doing this. And you kind of see that people now take on board this idea of that, well, if we're trust-based, and in order to develop trust, we've got to be vulnerable. We've got to be able to go, I'm good at this, but I don't think I'm very good at this, and I want to be better at that. And the only way we establish that is to create safe spaces. Yeah. And I go back to what you started to talk about as systems. Like I see it as team of teams. Like every classroom is its own small team, and my class is a team. And we make it a team, the school of teams. It's the system. Yeah. It's those things that count up.
It's an ecosystem.
Yeah. And we have to make, as teachers, safe spaces for kids. And then it's the safe spaces for students. And I think that students, for teachers. Like even more so, if we want to model those things, it becomes really, really important. I'm shifting this forward then, because we talked about that. And it kind of brings me to this next question I want to ask you, which is to do then with bias officers. So I've kind of said we see schools now that bring in these coaches. Do you think, in a wider ecosystem that we're getting to now, that we are going to start to see things like bias officers in schools?
Yes. At the start of the year, back in January, I posted what I think would be the school of the future, Gen AI enabled school of the future, and I did it as if it was an advert, looking for teachers. It was quite interesting. And one of the jobs within this school was pathway manager. So I think the role of a teacher is going to change to being pathway manager, where you oversee what's happening in your classroom, the different pathways, the different choices that AI is taking and how that's affecting them. And then sitting above you in the hierarchy, there would be the bias and equity manager, the overseer, that makes sure that the use within classrooms isn't negatively affecting certain groups. And as part of that, I think there will be certain vehicles and frameworks set up. Like, I really think schools should have a bias risk register. I mean, we know all this intersectional data. We know the biases. We know the demographics of our students. It should be relatively easy to look at specific students that are more at risk of negative impacts of AI use than others. And that would be part of the role of this bias and equity officer, to check as a teacher, what are you doing to mitigate that? And also as an institution, what are you doing to mitigate that? So where's the awareness and the interventions? And at the moment, I think we're in that kind of space where we've gone from, magic AI will plan lessons and do things for me. And now people have kind of accepted that. And now they're a bit like, well, what is it any good? Does it reflect my identity? And that's one of the things I say to teachers. When you use Gen AI, it's planned you a lesson, but does that resonate with you as a teacher and your identity? I know I like doing lots of things graphically. And I have more of a preference to getting kids moving around rather than sitting there doing endless retrieval questions, although I do like a bit of retrieval. So I know what my identity and where my strengths and weaknesses lie. So when Gen AI, and this is one of the things I did with my lesson inspector, actually, I tested all of the ILA, the Oak National lesson generator that's rolled out over here from the DfE. I tested all of those, and I tested TeachMate's lesson plans, and I tested Twinkle's lesson plans, and they all had their own little personalities in terms of the kinds of lesson plans that they would throw out. For example, the Oak one will quite heavily reflect cognitive science principles and explicit instruction, whereas the Twinkle ones will have greater diversity in kind of creative activities and tasks, and TeachMate's kind of in the middle. So I was trying to prompt people, I wrote a blog on it about pick your tool use to reflect your identity. And also, if, we're talking about comfort and vulnerability, maybe I want a bit of a challenge. I want a different type of lesson. So I'll pick Isla because I know it's different to what I normally pick. So these are the questions I think that need to sit within the leadership structure, because it's a whole school shared language and shared community safe space thing. It's not something that teachers should be doing individually. There needs to be that dialogue and that safe, low stakes environment. And that needs to be done before you do anything with the kids, because they will pick up from your modelling of your use of Gen AI what AI literacy is, regardless of what you explicitly teach them. If you teach them one thing and then don't practice it yourself, we know this from, normal teaching, pre-Gen AI, they will pick up, just like when you're parenting, the correct ways to do things. Like when I'm shouting at my daughter, not that I do a lot of shouting, but on the odd occasion, don't shout at me! And then she'll shout back at me because I'm modelling the opposite of what I'm saying. So.
Completely. I got to a point, and there's two things there, where even in class with my older students, like I want them to work with it. So I have it open. So I use Canva a lot, or within my room, I'll have like it on my board. So they'll see ChatGPT or they'll see Gemini open. I generally use ChatGPT and it's open there. And I'll even just model things like, right, what have we learned today, guys? And they'll go this. And it's like, right, let's just, and I'll type into it, create 5 questions for Year 7 science on this to check understanding. And it will come up on the board. And it's like, right, let's do that. And the kids then start to see me using it about, well, how is it being used to support my learning?
Yeah.
And because I don't want them, and I say to them, I don't want it to do the thinking for you. I want you to see how we use it to support learning. Yeah. And so that they'll have that. And for my style, I'm very much more, I like scenarios. I like to get them thinking to the point where in the last week, like I don't use models. I create my own GPTs or I create my own gems. I know you hate Gemini. I kind of like it for the gems.
No, I like it. It just provides me with a challenge. I like a bit of challenge.
And so I'll go, hey, what's inspired me this week? So I'll give you an example. I think Matt posted about this and he wrote about the book. It's Thinking with AI, I think it was, or whichever one around it is. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I do a little bit of research on that. And I'm like going, okay, this is pretty cool. And then I go back into myself. It's like, but what is thinking? And so I go into more research and I'll start going, okay, what's thinking? And it's like procedural, episodic, all these different types of things. I was like, oh, cool, I'll add that into this thing as well. And then I start thinking about that and I'm designing a few things and it's coming up with this. And I'm like, yeah, but is that for everyone? I like low floor, high ceiling tasks. How can I make it fit for all? Bit of research, build it in. And a colleague at work said to me, because I was sharing this, and she goes, oh, these are so cool. Like, how long would it take me to make one? I said, it'll probably take you 5 minutes. And she was like, oh, how long did it take you to make one? I went, 45. And she's like, what, why? And I said, I'm not being rude. I said, but because we're like, this is like, again, mastery, not mastery, but you know what I mean in terms of practitioners. Yeah. I'll make one and I'll go deep diving into the research and I'll be super interested in this and I'll start to pull these pieces in and I'll play around with the description prompts and how what's in there. So I'm happy with a gem that I can go, right, I'm teaching this for IGCSE. I've got I've got an acronym called ACCESS for low floor, high ceiling. It starts with anchoring and it comes in and then it gives me different pathways to go down.
Wow.
And so for me, like when you talk about all these different platforms, I'm like, I think they're great. But I'm very much on the side of I would love teachers to build things. I want students to build things that supports them in their preference because I like the creating part. And then I know, actually, I'm interested in this lesson. It's how I want to teach. And I want to give students agency and I want them to think of scenarios. I want them to have to think hard. I want them to think deeply. And the only way I get to that is if I've created something and then I'll go to the students afterwards. And so my A-level class today, I said, here's an assessment we're going to do. And it's made it. And the mark scheme's on AI. And I said, look, guys, I've taken all the papers. I've gone through it. I've sifted through this. I've written everything. So what you see as a mark scheme here is accurate to all these different exam papers and all the different mark schemes. So we can trust it and trying to show them in terms of building these things. And I think that's more important as we start to move forward, of being able to, I suppose it reverts all the way back to that first question. How can we safely put it in the hands of students? How do we safely put it in the hands of teachers not blindly letting them just go, there you go, but by showing them and inspiring them of you can create and build things fit for your purpose, for your benefit, for what you want it to be. It's going to take a bit of trial and error. It's going to take a bit of tinkering. It's going to take a bit of research. But the outcome isn't perfect, but it's pretty good in terms of what you're looking for. Yeah. You then bring the human part into it. For me, it's almost like what you've made. Like you've done it out of almost like this passion and interest of fit for purpose, and seeing that there's something isn't there on that market already that does those things. And that for me is the same thing about inspiring educators to build things and share things that fits in with their philosophy and their style and what they like to do as well.
I think there's a lot in what you've said there that's really important, because from what I understand that you've said, you are modelling how you are learning through the process of engaging with Gen AI rather than just the product of Gen AI. And I think that's a huge fundamental shift. And I think up until now, a lot of education has been product-based rather than process-based. And I've noticed a link between people who are perhaps more creative and more risk-taking, to be honest, and creative Gen AI use. So people like you and me who are developing these things, and others within the Gen AI and edu space, we tend to be people that are more kind of, let's see what it does, let's play with this, and we'll engage with it, and we co-create. And that skill of co-creation, you see it a lot with teachers in the classroom. I mean, I'm willing to bet that you will co-create meaning with even before Gen AI, you will co-create meaning from your classroom climate. A lot of teachers won't do that because there's a vulnerability. And so one of the things I'm really noticing with education is this big, vast difference between the kind of provision that you talked about there, and the flip side, like the people that don't feel confident and safe and aren't willing to take that risk in experimenting with that. And I think it's based on your values and your ethics, and it goes back to that idea of mastery of your subject and your pedagogy. But I also think that's a big issue for schools. And one of the things that leaderships and indeed the political frameworks need to manage, how do you enable all of your staff, because the vast majority of staff are somewhere in between or towards the low digital literacy end, how do you give them safe spaces and facilitate that, because they can't be left alone with it? In terms of what you were saying, just get started. That's what they need. They need people just to help them get started, and then say, what about that? Or look at the bias in that. Or, have you tried doing this in a low risk kind of environment? And that slowly moves them away from this product-based kind of transactional view of learning towards more of co-creation. I think the guy at Cambridge, is it Rupert Wegeriff? He talks about how Gen AI is another voice in the room. And I definitely see what you're talking about there, how you're using it as another voice in the room alongside the voices of your students, and you're pulling that all together. So, and that is a creative work in my mind, that gem that you've created that does that. That's a creative work. And you're providing the safe space for your students to experiment with that alongside you as a guardrail. To me, that's an ideal.
Thanks. I'm going to take that.
I'll give you a bias badge.
I love badges. Where's my I think I said something about it at the start of the year. I think I did a vlog, love videos and making stuff. And I said, for anyone out there, any of these companies, by the way, you're thinking of what you want to give teachers, love pins. I've got these, in terms of lanyards we have to wear, I've got pins all up and down it. So if anyone wants to bring me any more pins, by the way, love it. Love pins. I want to. It's just what I do, Wrapping.
Next podcast, you have to now be wearing all of your pins.
Maybe I will. Just later. Yeah. I want to maybe try and make my own. In fact, I did look at some point to make my own.
I'll buy one.
What do you mean? I'll give them away. It's
brilliant, even better.
I know, I've said this now. I feel like someone's going to use my own words against me. It's like my own kids use my own words against me. I want to wrap this one up. I really thoroughly enjoyed learning this, and I've got lots of good things written down as I do when I go through it. So the last question I have for you is if you had 5 minutes to train someone on AI biases, what would you show them?
What would I show them on AI biases? First of all, I'd show them what assumptions have you made here, the iterations on that. I'd show them a few key mitigation phrases because I found that teachers like those because there's something that you can see an immediate impact and make an immediate correlation with what you type in and what comes out. I would then show them my new bias cake approach, where I show the intersectionality. I'll be publishing that. So actually, it's on the AI and Edu. I'll drop you the link. And it's just a group of people, and then you slowly add on more and more context, and then it shows you the difference and how all the biases intersect. So I'd show them that. Things like if you add on, show me a group of 10 people with varying BMI or varying privilege, ensure diversity of race, cultures, age, things like that. I just give them kind of 4 or 5 flavours of bias and immediate prompts and get them to see the immediate impact, because I do think it's quite a scientific approach. Then I get them to reflect on that and write their own prompts with that in mind. Create a prompt of, your ideal classroom. Show me a picture of a happy, purposeful classroom and see how they can mitigate that. I think we'd do that in about 5 minutes.
Amazing. My happy class would just be me sat on a desk with a cup of coffee and the kids quietly just leave me alone. No, I'm joking. But it's like most teachers are probably
teacher film, isn't it, with Cameron Diaz? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, with the
legs.
That's
what she does.
Yeah.
With the mask.
I know exactly that film. Yeah. No, nothing like that. Not me sat there with my feet up.
With his pins on.
I'll be sat on the table, just loitering on the edge of the actual science tables with my coffee, just looking around what's going on.
Loads of Google pins. Doing his gems.
That's what I need. It started from, I'm going back into this now, so we were younger, we used to go to Hard Rock Cafe.
Okay.
And it started from there. My dad used to buy all the mugs, like the glasses. If you've ever been to Hard Rock, you buy the glasses from one of the different places you visit.
Yeah.
And mine was pins. And unfortunately, I had this massive, almost like pint-size, it was a pint-sized glass, a Hogarden glass, I think I took from Amsterdam at some point in my younger time, filled with all these pins.
Wow.
And I think I have them back in my mum's house. I'm hoping I still have them all back in my mum's house in the UK. But yeah, every time I go to Hard Rock Cafe, there's always something. And that's where it starts from. So yeah, in another life, if someone says to you, if you weren't teaching us, what would you do? Prior to that, I used to go, I'd probably go into like film production. I love making films. But now I think I'd go into like badge design.
You'd be able to do that with Canva quite easily.
I know, yeah. Can I come and work for you? Hard Rock Cafe.
Do you hear that, Canva? Hard Rock Cafe.
That's it.
I'm here.
Copyright. I don't know if we can. Well, Victor, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. And again, the reason I reached out and wanted to speak to you was because I wanted to learn more about bias, and I wanted the listeners and viewers to learn more about bias. And what I've taken from it is that bias isn't just about the technology problem. It's not just an AI problem. I think for me, it's the human problem. It's because it's what we input into it. It's what we push onto it. It's what it's trained and learned from us and our biases. And also the innovation that we want to happen with this happens when we confront it and when we look for purpose and we're not fearful of this, but we're open to it. And I've taken so many great things in my notebook from you today. I really appreciate Victoria. And I'm going to go and start looking at, again, LessonInspector.ai. I always end with this one, and we'll put it into the show notes, but if people to find you, to learn more about the work that you're doing, where is the best place for them to go to?
I have a website. It's genedlabs.ai. I've got my T-shirt here. Ooh, like this.
Very nice.
On there, there's everything I do in there, collabs, training, all bits and bobs. And also I'm on LinkedIn as well. That's my primary platform. Either of those, or you can email me, victoria@genedlabs.ai.
Wonderful. Well, again, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us today. And look forward to seeing all the work and things you have coming out in the future.
Okay, thanks. It's been really enjoyable. Thanks for your time.